So I'm Patrick Campbell, CEO, co-founder of Price Intelligently. We are, or prior to Price Intelligently, before I kind of give you our spiel, I started my career working in the intelligence community in DC, doing scary things. No, I'm just kidding. It wasn't that scary. It sounds a lot cooler than it actually is. And then I went and worked at Google for a little while. I was in what's called sales operations, which is essentially, they have a big sales team. Like, how do we make the sales team much more efficient and thereby make Google more money? And then I worked in a startup here in Boston before founding Price Intelligently about 3 years ago. And what our focus is essentially there's three pillars of your business, and specifically three pillars of SaaS. Acquisition, monetization, and retention. And we focus exclusively on monetization. So that kind of central pillar and helping folks figure out, how can they sell the right product to the right customer at the right price, essentially. And so with that, over the past couple of years, we've actually been one of the only people who actually write about this and think about this more than anyone else. And that's given us an interesting perspective where we've seen inside the financials as well as the kind of decision-making process of, I don't say this, dramatically, but more SaaS companies than anyone else. And that's given us a really interesting insight, not only on monetization, but also what's called value-based pricing itself. And I think for the format for this, just to kind of give you guys some background, because pricing, whether it's a hardware product, whether it's, SaaS software and application on mobile, or even, could be, a service, the fundamentals of pricing are the same. There's little nuances here and there, and the data out of the process that you use, are a little bit different. But at the end of the day, the process as well as kind of the fundamentals are the same. And so no matter what your product is, we can certainly pull some really good insights. And so let me share my screen, because I think I have a little deck here. Oh, that looks cool. I have a little deck here that I think is going to be a good one to kind of go through and learn a little bit. But because of the size of the group, because we're a relatively small group, definitely shout out your questions here and there. Mainly because we want to make sure that you're getting something out of this presentation as well as out of this experience. But just to check, you guys can see my screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So in terms of what we're going to talk about today, I think we're going to go top to bottom in terms of pricing. And so because of that, I'll share a lot of resources after the call here that you guys can kind of start to get into some of the nitty gritty. But more specifically, I think the biggest things for you guys to focus on at your stage is understanding why pricing is so important, how to set up a pricing process. It doesn't have to be this giant, thing within your organization. It can be something very simple that works within your customer development processes, and also can work within just your product development process. And then finally, how to think about pricing, in a couple of different ways. So we can skip about us. I kind of explained that. But the first thing here is, understanding that you guys got to take pricing seriously. And the reason this is so important is because we see so many companies, really, really sadly, they build a product that's, okay. It does its job. It has product market fit. It's fulfilling a need, and they just start to push all of their money and all of their efforts on acquisition. And that's great, obviously, because you need customers and you need prospects. But the problem with growth is that if you're getting customers at any cost, if you don't have a significant amount of money coming into your business, particularly through funding, you end up kind of shooting yourself in the foot, because your customers aren't really that much more valuable than the effort that you're putting into them. And when you look at a pricing page in particular, this kind of makes sense, right? Because everything that you're doing in your business, from your marketing and your sales all the way to your kind of product and development, is all leading to your particular pricing page, or some form of monetization. Sometimes it's a rate card with a salesperson. Other times it's an in-app purchase. No matter what it is, it's all working to justify the price that's on this page and keep that person coming back, whether it's through a repeat purchase if it's a subscription, or to purchase another product if it's something more retail based. But even beyond kind of the theoretical framework here, just to summarize, it's a central fulcrum to your business. That's kind of how we think about pricing. And it's not to say that it's the one thing that you should focus on 100% of your time, but it is to say that it is something that's fairly important within your business, because it really is that exchange rate on the value that you're creating. If a customer comes to your site or is using your product and then you ask them to pay for the product and they don't think that the product is worth what you're asking, they're not going to make a purchase. Vice versa, if they think the price is too cheap, they might question the quality of the product, or they might pay for it and they might be getting kind of the long end of the stick per se. But even beyond kind of the theoretical, getting into the more analytical here, price is one of the most effective levers in terms of your business. In particular, looking at a McKinsey study that's been done every couple of years, 1% improvement in your price equates to about an 11% boost in profit. And it's not necessarily the relationship here to understand the 1% to 11%, but it's more the fact that price has 3x the impact of increasing your volume, or improving your volume at the same capacity. And that's just kind of a summary there in terms of it really has a huge impact on your business, and not enough companies are really taking advantage of it. So, I've kind of buried the lead here a little bit, but what do you guys think is the average amount of time, folks are spending on their pricing?
Not enough.
Yeah, so clearly I've definitely hammered this home already too much, but really we found in a survey of about 500 companies that it's only 6 hours in the entire history of their business. And that's shocking. And that's why you start to see, all of these people preaching oh, it's the end in terms of startups, because, if the funding dries up, a lot of these companies end up, dying because, they lose cash flow because their burn rates are too high. And a lot of times, that comes down to monetization. So it's something that's hugely important. And, this isn't necessarily important to you guys quite yet, but it really is that commitment, that expertise, and that lack of process that we'll talk about in just a bit. But long story short, it's not hard. It's something that we're going to go through a little bit. It is a process though, and it's something that you kind of have to bake into the rest of your development process to be successful. And I kind of alluded to this before, but really you should be evaluating your pricing, probably every 3 months at your stage, and probably making changes every 3 months. And if you're evaluating on that particular cadence, you don't necessarily have to make major changes. So you might just be adding a feature here, adding a feature there, maybe raising the price a little bit, lowering the price a little bit. But really you should be reevaluating where you are every couple of months, especially in the early stages. And for folks who challenge this notion, normally I ask them, hey, did your product improve in the past 6 months, the past year, the past 5 years? Well, your price should improve as well to kind of match the value that you're seeing in your product. And so the biggest takeaway, and I know I'm preaching here, but it's really, you should take pricing seriously. It has an enormous impact on your business, and even at your stage, it can be a huge lever for growth. So it's not to say that you're not going to necessarily have bigger problems, just making sure that you can get customers, let alone monetize them. But as you start to figure out those different pieces of your business, you really want to make sure that you're driving people not only to that page but also to better monetization. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause here. Are there any questions there? such a smaller group, I don't want to talk to you. I want to talk with you, if you will. Does that make sense? Any questions so far?
No question.
No. Benefits.
But in general, you found pricing is a very important topic in all the startup scene, and as you mentioned, there are not many people writing about it because sometimes we think that it's very simple to define the price, but it takes more than 6 hours to define the price. But I guess you're gonna talk about what are the elements that need to take into account in order to define the price, or is it part of the presentation or not?
Yep, definitely. So I'm not done. Don't worry. I just wanted to make sure everyone was on the same page. I think, most of the time, the articles that are written basically stop where I just, stopped. It's like, hey, pricing's important. Great. Have a good day. But I think the reason not a lot of people focus on it is because they think it's too hard. But also they think it's, something that is, that's kind of a black box. You don't learn pricing in school. Even if you get your MBA, you typically take maybe one class, maybe no classes. And most people don't tackle pricing until, their CEO or their board's like, hey, go fix it. And so, yeah, it's one of those things where it's definitely part of a process. And so let me jump back in. Let's see here. All right. So here we're going to start getting into the process here. And this is kind of the second big pitfall we see in a lot of people's pricing is that they don't price on this concept of value. And that's a really nebulous, concept, right? Like value, like what is value? But, before we get into like how to define it, what we typically find is a lot of people are using competitive-based pricing. A lot of people are guessing, 1 in 3 people are guessing. And then, very, very few people, like basically 1 to 2 out of 10 are essentially asking their customers. And what's fascinating is if you think about other startup, activities like building your product, finding your customer, all of these different things, everyone's like, hey, go talk to customers, go talk to customers, go talk to people, talk to as many people as you can. But, when it comes to pricing, we don't really, follow through there. A lot of times we're not talking to customers, and, that ends up biting us and, biting us in the butt per se. And the reason you want to price on value versus cost plus or competitive base is that it's not that these two aren't important. You're going to have real costs in your business. Particularly if you're a heavy, if you're scheduling photos or, videos or things like that, there's probably some serious, actual bandwidth or storage costs. But at the end of the day, your customer doesn't care about your costs. They care about their costs. And we a lot of times get this wrong where we assume that, well, I have to cover my costs. And on the flip side of that, a lot of times when you look at SaaS in particular, you're able to charge a substantial amount more than your actual costs. So for instance, when you look at, Salesforce, which is a giant SaaS company, I'm sure you guys have heard of it, their charge or their costs are probably between $1 and $5 per user, but they're charging, hundreds of dollars for some of their plans. And that's because the value outweighs, any iota of their costs. And similarly, competitor-based pricing doesn't make a lot of sense because even if you're, a SaaS or a non-SaaS company, a retail product, you should be nimble enough to basically outmaneuver your competitor, whether it's through different messaging, different features, and even your price to a certain extent, not necessarily the price on the page, but the different value metrics that you're using. And so that's why these two concepts, you want to keep them in mind, but you want to charge based on what your customers are looking for, rather than, these internal factors such as your costs or competitors. And so this is where, I kind of alluded to it, most pricing advice stops, but what we're going to do is we're going to go through a little bit about a process that you guys can use, and more specifically, because of the stage that you guys are in, what specifically you should be asking your particular customers or your prospects or future customers to get a sense of where you should be monetized. And to kind of go through that process, what I want you guys to think about is whether you have a pricing page like this, a very traditional pricing page, or it's a rate card, or you're charging partners or whomever you're charging, there's going to be some sort of a page that looks like this. And the way I want you to think about it is two main axes. So you have this y-axis, which is the actual price that you're charging. And then you have this x-axis, which is the different features that are within your particular tiers. And when you start to think about pricing in that particular framework, what it allows you to do is allows you to start chunking the problem down and starts aligning these different personas that you're targeting to these different packages and price points. And that's where pricing really starts. It starts with that persona. And so how many of you guys, and I can't see you, but how many of you guys have buyer personas that you've kind of thought through and put down on paper?
The buyer persona is different to the user personas?
It's sometimes is the same, but how many you guys have the user personas, it sounds like? Do you have user personas at least?
You'll work on that, man.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I'm telling you, the biggest difference between the most successful SaaS companies that we've worked with, and I'm talking about Autodesk, New Relic, Optimizely, those kinds of companies, versus the companies we work with that aren't doing so good, and I won't name them, is buyer personas. And a buyer persona differs from a user persona in the sense that they are the one who's actually making the purchase. So most of the time, especially in consumer apps, it's the same person. So the person using the product is also the one purchasing it. But sometimes if you get to the enterprise, or you get into certain situations, that's where there's a little bit of difference between the user and the buyer. But what you really want to be doing is focusing on who are those people that you should be talking with. So for you guys, it might be 5, 6, 7 people you're starting out with, and then eventually you're going to start to whittle it down into a couple of different groups that you're really going to target. And what you do with these folks is you essentially want to make sure that each of these different personas aligns to an offer that you're making in terms of your pricing page. And so one persona might align to this particular plan, another persona to this plan, and another persona to that plan. And the reason this is so important is because when that buyer comes to your page, you essentially want them to know what plans for them, and then to make a purchasing decision in as quick a fashion as possible with as little confusion as possible, so that they can essentially make that purchase or not. In addition to that, understanding your buyer personas really helps because it allows you to align your purchasing funnel. So if you're targeting this table stakes Tony, for instance, what messaging that you should show him or her, what to charge them, and you also know what they need. And that's because SaaS, in startups more in general, it's all about cloning your customers. There's this concept of you really want to be, essentially targeting very specific groups of customers and making sure that you can essentially, replicate them as much as possible through your efforts in SaaS. So any questions there, just very generally on buyer personas?
No, we're cool.
Awesome. So in order to kind of quantify those buyer personas, there's a simple data process. It doesn't look that confusing, but it looks a lot harder than it is. Basically, you're going to start with those buyer personas. You're going to collect some data from them in form of surveys, and then you're going to consolidate that data down into essentially some takeaways and make decisions when it comes to pricing. So if you go back to that pricing page, remember there's those two axes. You have the x-axis, which is the features, and the y-axis, which is the price. And to go after the x-axis first, so to basically figure out what do users want, you want to be using a couple of different tools. One is this relative preference analysis, and this other is this price sensitivity analysis. And the relative preference, that targets that x-axis, what features should I sell to people? And then the price sensitivity targets the actual number. And the crux of all of these questions comes down to forcing people to make decisions. So when you're doing these user interviews, it's really tempting to be like, hey, what do you guys think? Or here's a bunch of features. Which ones do you like? But the problem is if you're not forcing your customers to make decisions, and specifically your users to make decisions, you're not learning anything from them. And you're also not forcing them to truly tell you, what they truly think. And so the relative preference analysis is basically we take, archaic survey questions kind of like this. And we've all answered surveys like this where, we're ranking different things on scales, but the end result is we can't really tell if, this particular feature is truly better than this particular feature or worse. And we're just changing the nature of the game by forcing them to make a decision between different features. And so what I would do in this situation is, all right, I have a list of features that we could monetize, or I have a list of features that we could even build. And rather than asking them something like this, what I'm going to say is, here's a couple of features. Tell me what the most important out of this list, and tell us what the least important out of this list is. And what you get are results that look like this. And what's so powerful about this is that you're able to see not only the ranking of what's most and least important, but you can also tell the magnitude. So for instance, I know that this feature is not only the most important, but it's almost 3 times as important as this next feature. And this really starts to really contextualize those buyer personas when you start to break them down by different groups. So you can start to ask, okay, consumer group 1, moms who live in the Midwest, let's say, they want X, Y, and Z versus moms and dads who live on the East Coast versus moms and dads who live on the West Coast. You can start to see what the difference is in those types of buyers, and that starts quantifying who that customer is and ultimately what they want, not only in a package to purchase, but also what the best positioning is for them in terms of pushing them to an actual purchase. So I'm going to pause there. Does that make sense? Any questions there? I know it's kind of a different concept, and we have a blog post that I can send you guys that kind of goes into the details of, asking these particular questions, but what can I answer right now to help you guys?
I think in my case it's different because the buyer persona are like powerful people of one industry, because I'm gonna make money with like advertising, and I mean the person who gonna decide if pay me for my advertising is like probably, ¿cómo se dice? Como jefe de marketing?
The chief marketing officer.
It's probably one chief marketing officer, and I can actually do surveys for this kind of people.
So keep in mind that you don't necessarily, it's better if you're selling to a consumer, for example, it is better to obviously get, dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of responses to these questions. But also keep in mind that even when talking to CMOs, which I would challenge you on, you can definitely send CMOs, surveys and also get data from them. But this is also a good framework to actually talk to them in conversations. So when you're doing your customer development, not necessarily in a sales conversation, but when you're, having an informational interview or, asking them for advice or things like that, like actually forcing them to make decisions allows you as the builder, as the founder, to figure out, all right, so I can, I only have so much time and so many resources. And I need to sell to this person a particular product. Maybe it's, different ad units, maybe it's different ad frequency, maybe it's a number of different things. And because of that, instead of just building and assuming what you think that user knows, that CMO, you can actually ask them in these conversations like, hey, out of, ad units, ad frequency, ad, format, et cetera, what's the most important thing to you? Is it control over the frequency? Is it control over this? And then what do you not care about? If you didn't have if one thing you could throw away, or it was okay that you didn't have, what is that? And the importance there is you're forcing them to make a decision so that as someone who's now going to spend resources on building that product or selling that product to them, you then know okay, they really care about this thing and they don't necessarily care about this thing, so let's only spend our time on what they care about. Does that make sense? So it doesn't have to be this, big data project. It's just a framework on how to think about things so that you get the best data for what you're building, even if it's a very small volume.
Okay.
Yeah. And you mentioned, Patrick, that you define, well, the best way to define the price is to understand your cost, and then also to benchmark with your competitors, and then to add value to understand what is the value for the potential buyers, personas, or customers. But how can you ask them if that is the right price? I mean, you make a survey, you ask them personally. How do you evaluate which features are the most important for them and how much they are willing to pay? What is best?
So we're going to get to willingness to pay in just a second. This is just features. But the biggest thing here, like the biggest takeaway, is to talk to your customers about this, because too many people, they create their pricing in a locked room with the rest of their team. And if you're not and that'll get you like maybe 50% of the way there. Because at the end of the day, the only people who can tell you how much they're willing to pay is your actual customer, because they're the one who's actually going to be purchasing it. And that's why this framework is so important, is because you can't necessarily ask them open-ended, because they're going to say they want everything. And similarly, if you just ask them how much they're willing to pay, like point blank like that, then they're going to just say a really low price. And so it's all about like how you ask. And then when you talk to enough people, and it might be 10 people, might be 1,000 people, depending on what you're selling. When you talk to enough people, you're getting more and more data to make those different choices for you. So I'll answer the pricing question in just a second, but does that make sense from like a data collection perspective?
Yeah.
I have one quick question.
Sure.
Just to be clear, you're giving away the same surveys to the different user personas.
Yep. So that helps keep your your experimental design aligned. And the reason you do that is because, like, let's say your app is it's kind of a productivity app. It's kind of also, a FOMO app, depending on how you look at it from different ways. Like your app has and I don't know anything about it, keep in mind, but like from what I understand, it has so many people. Like it has techies would be interested in it, moms wanting it for their kids. Like there's so many different applications. And so you probably have one of the biggest problems, because there's not a lot of competitors. Like there are, but they're not it's not like one thing comes to mind when I think about your product. And so that's why you want to, ask, okay, we have, a timer, we have a reward system, we have, I don't know the product in detail, but we have these different things. Let's send it to a bunch of different types of people and then break their data down on a few different angles, whether it's the person, whether it's the income level, whether it's the location. And then from there, you can start to figure out like, oh, that's interesting. Moms who want it for their kids really care about this feature versus, early adopter tech people want it for this feature. And that'll help you figure out what to build. And then when we get to price, it'll also realize like, oh, moms really care about that and they're willing to pay nothing. Let's not even worry about those guys. Early tech adopters, they're willing to pay X, and they really like this easy feature. Let's just go after those people initially. So good question, but yeah, you send it out to all the same people.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. So in terms of price, let's get to price so you guys can kind of understand a little bit around this framework. So remember, we have this pricing page, and the x-axis, we just kind of solved some of those features. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're only sending one survey. You can be sending different categories of surveys or categories of features. So for one, you might send overarching features. And then you might send like different details, like, hey, these are the future features we could build. These are, different value propositions. You can send all kinds of things using that particular framework. But for price, it's actually a lot simpler to figure out what the price is or what the willingness to pay is than a lot of people think. And that's because we think about this concept of value very relatively. And what I mean by that is when you think about a product, you don't think about a product as a single price or a single point in time. We think about value relative in terms of different objects. And so the computer that I'm speaking on today, I know that that's more expensive than the water bottle that I'm drinking out of. And similarly, I know both of those are less expensive than the building that I'm standing in. And it's a dramatic example, but we do it subconsciously and also consciously in almost every single purchasing decision that we make. And because of that, we can take advantage of that relative value by asking our customers or our potential customers different questions in ranged fashion to figure out what their willingness to pay is. And so what I mean by that is, rather than asking you point blank how much something's worth, I'm going to ask you, here's the object or here's the application. At what point is this way too expensive that you would never consider purchasing it? At what point is it a really good deal? At what point is it starting to get expensive? And at what point is it too cheap that you question the quality of it? And surprisingly, those 4 questions across a number of different buyer personas gives you some real. So each of those 4 questions, and I'll send a blog post follow-up that has kind of this framework, because I know it's a little hard in a presentation to get. But each of those questions corresponds to each of these lines. So at what point is it way too expensive? At what point is it getting expensive? At what point is it a good deal? And at what point is it too cheap to question the quality of it? And that gives you essentially where you should be priced. Now, I know this graph can be intimidating, but if we take a huge step back and talk about, talking to CMOs, for example, well, what's interesting is that you can essentially ask them these types of questions, maybe not all 4 of them, but you can say, hey, at what point is this way too expensive? At what point is this a really good deal? And even with those 2 questions, you can start to figure out, am I a $100 product? Am I a $1,000 product? Am I a $1 million product? But the big thing is you're letting your customer or potential customer essentially speak first and using actual data to get them to a particular price point. Now, if you have a much larger customer base, I would do this from surveys once again and include it in the same survey you're sending out for features. And there's a way to translate this data. It's a lot easier than it looks to basically figure out essentially what that elasticity curve looks like, and also essentially where you should be priced. The big takeaway, though, is you can make this as complicated as you want. The big thing is the framework, understanding that you should talk to your customers and you should ask them a little bit more nuanced question than, hey, how much do you think this is worth? Does that make sense? I'm going to pause there because I know it's an intimidating graph, but I just want to make sure that all makes sense to everyone.
Yeah, we get it. Yeah.
All right. So I didn't scare you with the graph. Is that what I'm hearing? All right, cool. So I'll send you the article that kind of explains the math. It's not that hard of math, don't worry. But what you're doing then is, keeping in mind, you've talked to your customer now, like you've either just sent one survey, you've just had a couple conversations, or you've done an entire, data center project on this. And you've gotten a ton of data around your personas, the features, and then also your price point. And you're aligning all of that into your particular pricing page so that you're essentially aligning those customers to those different packages at those different price points. And you might find, just for an example, that, if we're talking about the, I guess I keep calling it a productivity app. What's the better category? Is it health or is it?
Productivity.
Okay, productivity, cool. So if we're talking about a productivity app, you might find that, your customers, your potential customers, like if you're going to charge for it, outright rather than using advertising or, a number of different things, you might find that, hey, they're all at, the $10 price point or the $5 price point, but, they all want different features. We're going to have one price point. We're going to include all the features and, we just won't have everything for this persona or that persona. Similarly, for some of the products, like the marketplace product for the Roomie, you might find that it's a flat rate that people want, or you might find that they're willing to give you a percentage of fulfilling a roommate, or a number of different things. But it all comes down to like how you're going to charge, what you're going to charge for, and how much you're going to charge for. The important thing though, just to kind of hammer this home and hammer you over the head with it is, it needs to hinge on your value that you're finding through actual customer data. And data can be thousands of data points, or it can be a couple of phone calls. It's just really important to have those conversations with your customers.
Patrick, one question in that topic. How recommendable is it to use A/B testing of this kind of methodologies in order to experiment when you are pricing? Is it a good practice or no?
To A/B test? So A/B testing your pricing outright it's a very tricky thing to do. And the main reason it's tricky is because a lot of times you won't have statistically significant volumes of visitors. And so what I mean by that is like, especially in a SaaS or a software business, in an ad business, definitely, you have, tons of visitors, but a lot of times, even in like a mobile app, unless you get featured a couple of times on Apple and, get a bunch of traffic driving to your site, you don't have enough to like A/B test. And so the thing that we recommend is you should do this type of a framework to get as much of the information as possible. And then once you've kind of cleared some of the bigger problems and have a true A/B test, that's when you can, try to A/B test. And what I mean by that, to dig a little further, is imagine the different features that you guys have. You have, let's say, 6 features that you could vary in many different ways. You have, a ton of different price points that you could vary, and it creates kind of a multivariate test where there just won't be enough traffic to truly understand if feature A should go in plan A or feature C should go in plan D, or all the different features should be. But if you break it down to, your packaging and your general price point, which is like $50 to $100, then you can start to experiment with A/B tests because you're only testing one major thing. So short answer, do your homework first, then test.
Okay. And the second question would be, how recommendable is to experiment in both ways? I mean, raising the price and lowering the price. I mean, when you set the price and then you run a test, you can have some users using your SaaS. But what if you raise the price later? I mean, what could be the implication of that?
So, so if you raise the price on that customer or a new customer, or both?
On both, yeah.
Okay. So there are some, in your early days, normally you'll grandfather customers in. So let me back up a second. So you should be changing your price, like lowering it, raising it. Theoretically, you want to be raising it constantly. But you should be doing that at the very least once a year. At your stage, you should be doing it almost every 3 months. To kind of combat issues with existing customers, what you'll do in your early days is you'll do what's called grandfathering, which is just guaranteeing that person's price for either forever or for a certain period of time. We're a big fan of grandfather discount, it's called, which is you lock someone's price in for a maximum of like 12 months, let's say. And then after that 12 months, they get bumped up to the new price, or they, get, whatever happens with the price. And the reason this is so important is because, like, yeah, you want to reward that customer for being your customer, but you also don't want to miss out on, holy cow, the value of our product has tripled, and this person's on like still a $5 plan because we made some stupid mistake early on in our days. And so what I would do is, for those existing customers, I would handle it that way, a grandfather discount, or just straight grandfathering if you think that's the thing to do for your brand. And then for the new users, normally what you do is, if you have longer sales cycles, you can essentially just not start a price increase or price decrease until the next sales cycle. But you can also just announce the pricing changes coming to your existing prospects, and normally that'll clear out your sales funnel pretty quickly. So especially in mobile apps, we've seen this with so Runkeeper was a big customer of ours, and basically when they announced the price increase, they were just like, hey, the price is going to increase, and all of the leads who were on the fence just bought right away to lock in the existing price for a year. And then after the year, they got bumped up to the new price. So that's kind of how I'd handle existing and new customers. And we wrote an article on this too that I can send your way that kind of details all there's a couple of other options that you guys have too. But that's how I would handle them.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good question. Cool. Let's keep cranking along here. And then, all right. So the last big thing to kind of talk about here is really having a mono price mindset. And what we mean by that is essentially you shouldn't have just one price. So even in mobile, if you're selling an app, you should try to figure out how you can have different levels of plans. You might start off with just one plan because in the early days, it makes it as easy as possible. But eventually you should start having tiers. And the reason for this is because you want to make, and this is a little screenshot of a product that we offer as well to track your metrics. But you want to make sure that the growth from your new users and the growth from your existing users are both going up and to the right. And the way that you do that is you need to make sure that your existing users have something to buy. And that could be more of the same product that they're already using, or it could be, a higher level plan, because when you have both of these graphs going up and to the right, that's how you get what's called net negative growth, or excuse me, net positive churn. And it basically means that you're getting, more customers through the door for every dollar that you're spending, even if some people are leaving. And the way to do this is essentially, I'm going to skip this slide here, is through two different ways. Feature differentiation, which we've talked about a lot. So if you're selling an ad package, you might sell, one package has 1,000 impressions at X costs, and another package has 1,000 impressions, but it also includes premium support, and that's at your X cost plus 1, let's say. And then the other way is through what's called a value metric, and that's essentially where you're charging for actual usage of your product. So this is even simpler with advertising, where you basically charge per impression, per click, per CPA, however you set up your particular structure. Now, the reason this works so well is because we've talked about feature differentiation, but you get at different points on this particular curve. So if you only have one particular price point, that means you're only capturing this revenue and you're leaving out all of this revenue that's over here and over here. If you add more tiers, you're starting to capture more and more of this. So let's say, for the productivity app, we had a $5 tier and a $10 tier. You're able to get more of this demand curve. With a value metric, you get all of it, because you essentially get people entering this particular demand curve at every single point, and you're able to capture as much revenue as possible. So to kind of go through an example of a value metric, because I know it's a little bit of a nebulous concept, but there's this company called Wistia. They're a Boston-based company, and they do what's called video hosting and analytics, which basically means instead of loading your video to YouTube, you load it to their platform, and you can do a bunch of cool stuff with it. But what's cool about them is they have two value metrics here. So they have the number of videos and then the amount of bandwidth you're using. And that's essentially the main differentiator between these different tiers. And it makes sure that the small companies or the small usage companies are paying less than the really large companies. And if you don't have this, normally what will end up happening is you'll have the same types of companies paying the same price, even though one company is getting a hell of a lot more value out of it. And so the way to do that is, you want to basically figure out, like, is it per login? Is it per ad? Is it per, connected roommate, which is a pretty clear one. It aligns to the customer's needs. It should grow with the customer, and it's got to be easy to understand. So for some of you guys, like, it's going to be very difficult to have, a really good value metric. So for the productivity app, you might not be able to, charge based on, times they use it, because that would kill your retention, obviously. You could charge for the number of times they fail, if they pick up their phone before, they're supposed to. that's an interesting way to kind of incent them, one, not only to use the product in the right manner, but also to give you more money. There's different ways that you can do this, but it's a really, really important because you want to make sure that you're scaling your pricing with where that value is. A company called HubSpot, so they do marketing automation. They actually combine both of them. I would not recommend doing this if you're selling to consumers, mainly because it becomes really confusing, and that's why HubSpot you only can buy through a salesperson. But they actually make you choose a feature differentiated package, and then they charge you based on the number of contacts. So it's kind of a combination of the two. Long story short, though, have a multi-price mindset. You can use feature differentiation, you can use a value metric, but you want to make sure you're taking advantage of the people who are willing to pay more, and also still capturing those people who are willing to pay less. So any questions there? I know we went through that really quickly, but I just want to make sure that we got through it because I know you guys are coming up here on the hour here. But any questions there?
What the example that you were just showing, was that is that like a subscription model though?
HubSpot?
Well, you were saying like just the different value metrics. Is that a one-time flat fee, or would that be? Are you thinking more of a case of membership?
So they actually combine both. So for example, like let's say for you guys, like let's say you do something where you're like, every time you pick this up before you're supposed to, you pay us $5. So that's not a subscription. That's obviously like a pure usage model. What HubSpot does is they basically combine a usage model and also a subscription. So you get up to 10,000 contacts for $1,000 per month, let's say. And if you have 500 contacts, it doesn't matter. You paid for 1,000 or 10,000, so you're still paying us $1,000. You want to set those levels at comfortable places, and normally you'll have people slide down to a lower tier, but still having a tier allows you to kind of quote unquote guarantee that subscription. And from a business perspective, that makes sense because technically they're still using the product. And so normally you'll see them, basically have a huge striation of value metric, or in the case of Wistia, it's like up to a certain amount you pay, X or Y.
In the multi-price mindset, how many is too much when defining the different packages that you're showing at least on your website?
Yeah, so we typically find, I think it's like from a purely statistical standpoint, I think it's like something like 40% of SaaS companies have 4 tiers, or 3 or 4 tiers, like right around there. Normally what I would say is like, if you're doing feature differentiation, just make sure that it aligns to each of your customers. And theoretically, you should only be targeting like 3 or 4 customers because you don't have time or resources to really go after more than that. And so that kind of makes it 3 or 4. If you're using a value metric that's like HubSpot, they actually have a really big list of like different value metrics. So that I think it's like it's like 100 different levels. Their advantage is the salesperson puts together a pricing package for their customers rather than like a customer having to self-select. But if you look at a lot of like developer type products too, like they basically charge per usage. So it's a little bit easier to go.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, good question.
Nope.
Cool. Oh, do you have another question?
No, just keep going.
Yeah. So overall, I think those are the big 3 points that I kind of wanted to talk about, and I have to re-show my screen here. So those are the big things. We talked a little bit, or just to recap, take pricing seriously, use customer data, and then get to a multi-price mindset as soon as possible. As soon as possible for a mobile app, maybe years. For an ad platform, it's pretty easy to have a multi-price mindset. especially if you're selling your ads door to door or on the phone, essentially. If it's a self-service ad platform, it's a little bit different. Some other things to kind of keep in mind, aggressive discounting strategies are a pretty big mistake. And what I mean by that is if you're only making your you're doing it wrong. You probably should just lower your price. We typically find that discounting, like folks who are using aggressive discounting strategies, their lifetime value of their customers is about 30% lower when it's adjusted for the drop in price, obviously. So that's a pretty big drop just because those customers typically aren't good. They don't stick around. They're not retained. We talked a little bit about A/B testing. Just be really careful with it. If you're doing an A/B test, it should be truly an A/B test, meaning like one thing is different than the other. Don't have, a ton of different things on one page and a ton of different things on the other. You probably just don't have traffic for it. And then I alluded to this a little bit, but don't try to be everything to all people. For a consumer mobile app, that's really easy to do because you're like, oh, let's just like drive a ton of traffic and see what we can do. But a lot of times you want to make sure that you have those buyer personas kind of picked out because you can always expand, to those different other buyer personas. But you want to try to like focus everything that you can on a couple of buyer personas initially, just so you can figure out all your unit economics and not get distracted. Just check out our blog as well. I'll send along a couple of posts that I reference just so you guys can get the basics. Like I said, just get some traction on looking at your pricing. Don't try to do everything, at once. And then also, like, if you guys, this is from our webinar, but yeah, if you guys wanted to chat with me personally about your startups and things like that, I'm more than happy to get on the phone or answer questions via email. It might take a day or so, but I'll still get back to you. Yeah, always willing to help. So happy to answer any questions. I know, some people bring up different things they've heard and want a perspective, but yeah, I'm here to help.
If you can tell us a bit more how you work with entrepreneurs and startups, about your company.
Yeah, so we typically work with folks who are like post Series A or bigger, just because we charge some cash, and so with that, it's one of those things where for the folks who are pre-Series A, we essentially give free advice. So any questions that you guys have, if you want us to look at a pricing page or anything like that, like I said, it might take a day or so to get back to you, but always willing to give some advice. You just have to reach out and ask for it. In addition to that, like our blog, we've pushed a lot of those posts to people because we've probably explained something or another at some point, like how to handle price changes in existing customers. Like we've written a pretty comprehensive blog post on like stuff like that. Additionally, we have I don't think anyone here applies, but if you're a SaaS company, we offer basically an analytics platform for SaaS companies for their financial metrics, their different SaaS metrics like MRR and stuff like that. But it sounds like a lot of you guys are either a platform or a marketplace, or
No, we are SaaS.
Okay, so are you guys? So depending on what your billing platform is, we can hook you up and get you your SaaS metrics.
Well, how much is that platform?
Sorry?
How much is that platform?
That is free for the basic metrics. So we're running a freemium model. It's called ProfitWell. So I can share that with the group here.
ProfitWell?
Yeah, I'll show it.
It's kind of like Bear Metrics.
It's better than Bear Metrics.
Okay.
So we have we give you real-time data. So it's Bear Metrics is not like real-time, and I could go into a bunch of stuff, but I'll let the product speak for itself. So we for the Bear Metrics, we essentially charge nothing, and then we have some premium add-ons that people use to keep cranking.
It's awesome.
Great.
Does that connect to Stripe, or where does that connect?
Yep. So it connects to Stripe, Zora, and then we also have an API that you can hook up to anything. The marketing site's changing, hopefully by the end of this week, because we've basically what's really good and like for you guys, like our product, it's something to kind of like go after because it's the first time it's happened with us is our product got ahead of our marketing and our sales, which can be a really bad thing, but it also is like a great thing because basically our marketing site is just lagging and we already have a ton of people on the Zora integration and like all kinds of stuff like that. So it's always good when the worst thing in your well, not the worst thing, there's plenty of bad things, but the lagging thing in your business is your marketing site. It's always a good thing to see.
So hopefully we're gonna have 5 projects with Series A then.
Say that one more time.
Yeah, hopefully we're gonna get to that point at least with the 5 companies.
Yeah, because we saw you start around $15,000. That's your starting price, right?
Yeah. So for Price Intelligently, we do smaller projects for 15, 20K. It's something where like honestly, like if you guys put in the work, early enough on in your own customer development processes, just the free advice will probably help substantially. Like we typically come in when people they've waited too long or don't have the expertise, let's say. And if you guys follow a customer development process and just building your product, let alone like doing your pricing, like you'll have the expertise and hopefully will learn as you go. Because like I said in the beginning, like this isn't super difficult. It's just a process. Like there's little things that you pick up on and there's little like trends that you'll see, but at the end of the day, like it's so customer focused that as long as you're just customer focused in everything, which you should be to a greater extent, then your pricing will be okay too, essentially.
Okay. There are no more questions. We highly appreciate your time, Patrick. Thank you very much for the talk, and definitely, I mean, share with us some articles. I already sent to all of them the link of your blog, but still, if you have some specific articles that you consider we need to check, then yeah, send it to me.
Absolutely. I will send along a couple of the articles I referenced, and then I'll send this deck along as well. Yeah, just let me know if you have any questions. Like, I mean, we're a completely bootstrap company, so we've gone from just me in a room, like earning nothing, to 15 people now, and enough runway to hire 20, which is great, or enough cash flow, I should say, to hire 20. And so, it's one of those things where I totally get like where you guys are at. And so if you have any questions on not only pricing, like I'm more than willing to help, but any questions on like anything else as well. Like obviously like a lot of people helped me to get to this point and we still have a long way to go, but always willing to, pay it forward or pay it backward or whatever we need to do to help.
Okay. Thank you very much. So I'll give you my hand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks guys. We'll see you later and good luck with everything.